So with that, we have Colonel Smith. Welcome to the committee.
Morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, ladies and gentlemen of the committee. I truly appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today and talk about the state of the Kansas Highway Patrol in 2024. I have a brief slide presentation that I want to make remarks on today, beginning just generally speaking about the composition of the patrol as you know it, and then we'll graduate into some restructuring and reorganization within the patrol, just beginning over the last 30 to 45 days. All set? Next slide. The first graphic that I want to bring to your attention is the patrol as you've known it for years. In terms of road troops, the Kansas Highway Patrol is divided up into 8 road troops, beginning in Kansas City and counterclockwise: Kansas City, Topeka, Salina, Hays, Garden City, Wichita, Chanute, and then not pictured is the Turnpike Troop. What I want to draw your attention to, and it'll become a little bit more clear why I'm doing this as I talk about staffing and recruiting. Each of those troops are then further divided up into zones, which are color-coded. And the point to this is that, for example, I'll use Troop D up in the upper left. You can see that in brown, there is a zone for which 1, maybe 2 troopers are assigned, and that's an 8-county area. For 24-hour coverage or even 16-hour coverage per day, 1 to 2 troopers doesn't really quite slice the need in terms of road coverage. And this is going to become important later on when I show a graphic about where we're at in numbers, in staffing. But the bottom line is we're currently down a deficit of about 66 sworn positions. Those 66 include road troopers, but they also include our specialty units such as our canine handlers, our bomb disposal unit, our aircraft pilots, and even our Capitol police officers. So 66 sworn officers represents about 13%. And anytime that number is a double digit, that's a check engine light, that's a warning sign. So it's going to be the focus, as it has been since I got here last summer, to really increase our efforts on staffing and recruiting. Before we get into that topic, though, let me just move to the next slide and just talk a little bit about agency restructuring. This is a deviation from any past presentations that you might have heard either from me or from others about the composition of the Highway Patrol. This is our new organizational chart, and on the surface, it may appear to you, just by a quick look, that it's a little bit top-heavy, perhaps, but upon further inspection, particularly as you compare it to the old org chart, which was very vertical, very narrow, my belief is that when leadership flattens, components that were historically at the bottom of that very tall vertical chart suddenly elevate a little bit closer to the surface, and as a result, they're going to get more visibility, they're going to get more resources, and most importantly, they're going to get more leadership. My goal is to balance each of these priorities within the Highway Patrol by aligning troops and units with similar responsibilities under the same umbrella. This ensures that everyone receives the attention that they deserve and allows the agency to better meet our mission and our obligation of service and protection. Next slide, please. I want to focus on what's new in the patrol. The first thing is the Protective Services Bureau. I've talked to many members of the legislature over the fall and into the winter about a vision to place a focus, an emphasis, a priority on protective services. The Protective Services Bureau is new only in that it took elements within the agency that existed elsewhere and brought them together under one command for a unified purpose. Next slide, please. The Protective Services Bureau consists first and foremost of the Capitol Police. Why is that important? Capitol Police, if you look at the old org chart, it was way at the bottom and it was way to the left, and that was really indicative of the time and the attention that they received. That's not appropriate, it's not proper in today's environment with politically charged rhetoric, politically motivated violence, violent attacks or cyber attacks or threats, powdered letters mailed to members of the legislature, or any threat that targets a member of this body, an occupant of this house, or frankly, any executive branch or judicial branch employee. So what the Capitol Police does is, it's statutory obligation, I found in 2 statutes, an absolute responsibility on the Highway Patrol to provide both physical and personnel security within the Capitol area complex. That's not just the legislative branch. That's all 3 branches. So this unit, the Capitol Police, really needs to be treated like a specialty unit with specialized training, with access to special intelligence in order to mitigate threats before they become a reality. And perhaps in another forum, if this committee is interested, I can discuss in a little bit more detail about what those threats look like. Next slide, please. The Executive Protection Unit is something that's always existed. It's answered directly to the Office of the Superintendent, but by merging it with the Protective Services Bureau, it can more closely coordinate both the intelligence received and the response, both at Cedar Crest, at the State House, and wherever the governor may travel. Next slide, please. And then Homeland Security and Emergency Operations. This was another unit that was, I believe, underutilized in terms of their expertise. It was listed at the bottom of the previous org chart and off to the other side, where little time and attention was paid to what Homeland Security and Emergency Operations did. But today, Homeland Security not only administers the millions of dollars in federal grant money that is passed through to state and local organizations and state and local units of government, but they also house our participation in the Kansas Intelligence Fusion Center, and they also house our task force officers that are deputized by the FBI on the Joint Terrorism Task Force. And this is the protective intelligence component that feeds the threats to the other protective services units in order to respond to and mitigate any potential threat. Next slide, please. The next organizational realignment structure that I want to talk about is investigative services. It wasn't before this committee, but I recognize some of the committee members that I've recited this statistic to. In another presentation, I talked about some of our metrics achieved in 2022 and in 2023, and there was one metric about felony arrests. And the number was, I think, 2,146 felony arrests in 2022. That's a good number for the troopers that we have out on the highway and the felonies that they encounter. My question then was, what happened to those felony cases? The answer is we really couldn't tell you what happened to those felony cases. It was historically the responsibility of the trooper who generated that case to follow that case through prosecution. That's unlike any city or county agency in this state. When a trooper encounters a felony arrest and completes the booking process, they go back out to work the road as we expect them to do. What happens to that case? This Investigative Services Bureau, next slide, please. Can you skip one more and then I'll come back to this one? Creates a troop that follows up on those felony cases. It's, for lack of a better term, a detective services function, where the interviews are conducted, where the evidence is compiled, where forensic evidence is tested, laboratory reports are obtained, and a prosecution package is submitted to a district or a county attorney, allowing the road trooper to get back out to cover the large swath of land that he's required to patrol. Back up one slide if you would, please. Troop N, this is a troop that has always existed. This houses our criminal interdiction teams, our domestic highway enforcement, where they focus on criminal interdiction, drug interdiction, human trafficking, also asset forfeiture. This is a unit that's always existed. By bringing it into the investigative services Bureau, it's more consistent with what their function actually is. 2 slides, please. Finally, Troop V, these are our VIN inspectors. Again, something that's always existed, but it's been a part of another bureau, and it's been treated more like a regulatory function. VIN inspections, where someone has an out-of-state title that they need inspected in order for a Kansas title to be issued. The reality is this is more of an auto theft unit than it is it is a regulatory function, but they uncover a significant amount of auto theft. And in this role, what they uncover is a lot of insurance fraud and a lot of organized crime. By housing it within an investigative services bureau, the disciplines marry up and match a little bit more appropriately. Next slide. The final major reorganization piece is the Administrative Services Bureau. As you probably know, a lot of the business operations functions in the patrol were previously led by a uniformed officer at the rank of major. Not to discount the training and the qualifications and the experience of a major, but the reality is their portfolio included our fiscal director, our HR director, our IT director, our fleet services. These are business functions. And in my view, someone with the professional credentials and the technical expertise required of business operations, better felt to me, should be led by someone with those credentials and with that job experience. And so these components of the organization were realigned and placed under our new Chief Administrative Officer, Sherry Mackey, who's with us today, and she holds the rank of Deputy Secretary now and leads all of our business operations components within the agency. Next slide. One more, please. The last thing I wanted to talk about before I move on to agency staffing is professional standards. I think it's important for the committee and frankly everyone to know that professional standards in the Highway Patrol previously was limited to internal affairs investigations, the response to allegations of misconduct by agency personnel. That remains a vital part of professional standards, but its role has been expanded somewhat. We created a new position of audits and inspections, and while internal affairs investigates individual allegations of misconduct, individual compliance with the rules, the inspections and audit team ensures that the agency is compliant with our program standards and our program rules. So one is individual compliance, and the second is agency compliance. All right, on this slide, just briefly, agency staffing. First of all, we understand that recruitment and retention is not just a KHP problem. It's not just a state of Kansas problem. It's, in fact, a nationwide issue. There are a lot of factors that lead to that. Societal norms, work ethic, changes in generation. A lot of that stuff we can't control. So what we've decided to focus on at KHP is what we can control. Our hiring process, our applicant process, our eligibility standards. And before I go any further, I don't want you to think that we've lowered standards, but we've changed the way that we viewed some of those standards. The easiest example is to talk about our modification of the tattoo policy. Historically, a visible tattoo was a disqualifier. Today, visible tattoos, as long as they're not on the face, the head or the neck, or visible on the hands, with the exception of a wedding band tattoo, visible tattoos that are non-offensive are now appropriate to be visible in a short sleeve uniform. Again, this graphic just underscores what I talked about earlier. In terms of where we're short, 66 positions, 21 of those are Capitol police officers full-time, 12 are part-time, and 6 are motor carrier inspectors that man scale houses and do weight enforcement around the state. The rest are uniformed troopers assigned to those various patrol districts around the state. Next Next slide, please. This kind of gives just a historical trend of where we've been and where we're at now. We're currently in Class 68. Class 68 started last week. We began 11. Unfortunately, within the first week, we're now down 3, and we have 8 enrolled. The next class, Class 69, begins in July, followed by a concurrent condensed and lateral class. Let me just talk about our recruitment efforts. First of all, with respect to the lateral classes. In 2022, we began a program where prior certified law enforcement officers in Kansas could apply to the patrol, but rather than starting them from square one and retraining them, we recognized their state of Kansas certification and started them in a condensed academy that was shortened and truncated by about half to allow them to learn issues specific to KHP's mission, but relied on their prior certification and didn't start that training process over. That was successful in 2022. It was replicated in 2023, and I think we just graduated in December 11 of those. In 2024, we're going to expand that prior certification eligibility, not just limit that to Kansas certification, but expand that to other states as well. So if someone is certified for 3 years or longer in another state, we'll run them through what the Kansas Law Enforcement Training Center and the Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training recognizes as a reciprocity process. And if reciprocity is granted, then that applicant can enter the condensed truncated academy as well. And then second to that is we would like to get to a capacity within our training center where we can run 2 of those per year as opposed to just 1. Another thing that we can control that I think was a disadvantage to us is KHP used to open a job advertisement on one date. They'd let it run for a period of time and then they would close it. If that application process was closed and an applicant was interested in becoming a trooper, they had no way to apply. The application process was not open. That's illogical. Those advertisements are now open until filled. And with 66 openings, that solicitation will be open for quite some time. In terms of encouraging people with experience and exceptional skills to apply to the patrol, we're now able to place someone with that prior certification on a higher step within the starting trooper pay grade. We've also, as a result of our negotiation with the State Troopers Association, initiated an incentives committee to study what types of skills, qualifications, and certifications might qualify one for an incentive pay. The easiest example that I can use to illustrate this issue is our pilots. If I have a technical trooper or a lieutenant or a captain that is a pilot, they are paid the same as a technical trooper or a lieutenant or a captain on the road. This becomes problematic when, for example, a pilot has a jet rating. We recently, just last month, lost one of our longest tenured executive aircraft pilots to a commercial airline because he was paid what a lieutenant was paid, not what a market pilot should be paid. So we need to find a pay structure that will compensate people with special skills, special skills and special certifications so that we aren't losing them to the private market. Another issue that comes up quite often is our uniforms. I like this uniform, I like to wear this uniform, and I like the way that this uniform looks. It's also 100% wool, and it costs me $17 to dry clean it. And that's just not practical with the expectations that we have of a trooper out on the road. Now, I'm not advocating to change the way that this looks. I'm simply advocating to change the type of material, the type of uniform to something that looks very similar but is also wash and wear and also isn't going to be torn to shreds by rolling around on the ground under a truck doing an inspection on the interstate, for example. The last thing in terms of our recruitment efforts that I feel is noteworthy is when I came to the patrol in July of last year, the MOA with the Troopers Association had been expired for about 8 months. And there was a contentious relationship with the Troopers Association, but they elected to wait and seek a new MOA new negotiations until after I arrived in July. We started that process in August, and historically, those have been anywhere between a 3 and an 18-month process. I very naively advocated to get that done in 30 days, and thanks to the staff, many of which are sitting behind me today, that was actually done in 28 days. And the reason why I think that that's important is because when our employees are happy and when they feel appreciated, they actually are our best recruiters. And now we have a whole cadre of State Troopers Association members who are actively recruiting for colleagues to come join them at the Highway Patrol. Just to change gears a little bit, I want to talk about our aging infrastructure issues that we're facing at the patrol. The governor's budget recently requested about $7.2 million in maintenance, repairs, and updates to our training facility in Salina. If any of you have visited that facility, you'll understand that some of the crumbling concrete and broken pipes and impassable stairwells require an update. For us to train new troopers in an adult learning environment, we have to at least meet standards that our elementary schools have. And technologically, we're not there yet either. So there are some significant repairs and updates that need made to that facility. And so we'll be asking for support this session in that regard. The governor's budget also requests $10 million to build a new statewide communications center in Salina. The current statewide dispatch center is housed at the same campus that the training center is. It's outdated, it's been outgrown, and frankly, it's not built or designed to withstand any type of disaster which would knock out our communications statewide, so we'll be asking the legislature for support in a new facility there as well. One other thing that was mentioned in the governor's budget that I'm also very passionate about is this notion that as an employer, the state of Kansas the governor is asking for the minimum pay to be raised to $15 per hour. Anecdotally, I was told that there were over 900 state of Kansas employees that made less than $15 an hour. And so I asked our CFO to find out how many of those were KHP employees. The answer was 6, and while that may not seem like a very large number, most of those are very tenured employees. They've been with us for many years. They would see an immediate raise. What's also sad about that is the number of employees that actually make more than 15 but less than $17 an hour and have been employed for 15 to 20 years by our agency. For what we ask of these folks in whatever pay grade or job series classification they're in, that's frankly a shame. And you, your constituents, expect them to be professional career servants. Yet we pay them what's actually less than a high school part-time job wage. I think we can do better. I think that we get what we pay for, and I think that it costs what it costs to provide that service. So we would certainly support that proposal from the governor as well. But then on a larger scale, rather than coming to the legislature with our handout for career progression plans for this series or for that series, it seems like the troopers, the dispatchers, and some of those employees that are on a career progression plan, we take care of them. We do a very good job doing that. There are a lot of employees that are left out of that discussion. So we need to have a comprehensive pay study that recognizes the contributions of all of those non-sworn civilian staff that are in other job classifications. A couple more things, and then I'll wrap this up. I did want to let the committee know that there is an application development process going on with other partners within state government. This is to develop an app that, much like you can renew your driver's license online, and much like you can set an appointment to renew your license plate online, you currently can't do that to have a VIN inspection. You can't title an out-of-state car without going and standing in line at one of the many facilities around the state. And in some places, Olathe, for example, the Olathe police threatened to write those customers parking citations for wrapping around the block and down the street. We feel that we can address that by an online application and scheduling process, so that app development is underway to help those citizens. From a technological perspective, it might surprise you to know that KHP does not wear body cameras. In today's day and age, that should be a shock to you, and it should not be acceptable to you. It's not to me. It's not to your constituents. From a transparency perspective, we advocate for that. I know the citizens do as well. It's good to hold ourselves accountable. It's also good to exonerate someone from false claims, and frankly, it just creates a good piece of evidence for criminal prosecutions. So we would be asking the legislature, and it is in the governor's budget, for $2 million. We're supplementing that with a grant application to the Department of Justice for a matching $2 million. But whether or not that grant is approved or not, we do need body cameras for our troopers. And so we would be asking for a $2 million appropriation in that regard. And finally, what else are we asking the legislature for support this year? Our legislative agenda is brief, but it focuses strongly on traffic safety. We will be asking for support in the legislature for an excessive speeding bill. Just by the numbers quickly crunched, over the last 4 years, this is 2020 through 2023 calendar years, the Kansas Highway Patrol wrote about 250,000 speeding tickets, about 250,000 over 4 years. 60,000 of those citations were written for speeding in excess of 20 miles an hour over the posted limit. Here's where it gets dicey. 12,000 of those citations, 12,000, were written to people traveling over 100 miles per hour. It's unacceptable. Those are your family, those are your friends, those are your constituents that are subjected to that type of reckless, careless, and negligent driving. And just another number, in 2023, there were 351 traffic crashes that resulted in 384 deaths. So 351 fatality crashes. Some of those were multiple fatalities. 384 people died. Every one of those traffic deaths was preventable. And to the extent that excessive speed was a causal effect for those fatalities, we've got to do something about excessive speed, and we're going to focus on speed in excess of 100 miles an hour. We'll be asking for legislation to help address that problem. Finally, an ignition interlock fee fix. In 2022, when the legislature moved the responsibility for the ignition interlock device out of the Department of Revenue and over to the Highway Patrol, they authorized the vendor to collect a fee from the person who was convicted of DUI and required to have an ignition interlock device. The vendor was allowed to collect a fee and pass a part of that fee on to the Highway Patrol to administer the program. The Attorney General issued an opinion last fall that said that the statutory language did not allow for the vendor to collect a fee for the continuing monitoring for purposes of compliance with that device installation. So we'll be asking for a language fix that will allow the vendor to collect that fee for continuous monitoring during the period of their compliance requirement. I think that's all I have to brief the committee on today, and I appreciate your time, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Before we open it up to questions, our law enforcement officers and our agencies in our state are very small. We have a lot of small ones. Could you highlight some of the services that you can support that you provide to those smaller law enforcement agencies?
Sure. Off the top of my head, I can think of one number that was striking to me when I took this job, and that is explosive ordnance disposal. There are some agencies in the state, two that I can think of that are very large agencies, that have a bomb squad, a bomb unit. But 75% of the hazardous ordnance disposal calls across the state of Kansas are handled by the Highway Patrol. So that hazardous device response, it's our responsibility, largely. Kansas Highway Patrol is also the only agency in the entire state that has an air support unit. I get reports weekly that have pages and pages and pages of pursuits that are successfully resolved because the units on the ground can back off and focus on public safety, while the air units follow that person until they stop driving and can be taken into custody. It's not just pursuits. It's, I hear constantly from the chief in Wichita, him sharing his praise for our pilots in Wichita, chasing down drive-by shooting suspects or other violent criminal offenders. So that's a service that only the Highway Patrol provides. But it's more than just that. It's a partnership simply to back up understaffed or underserved areas of rural Kansas where a backup officer is needed on a domestic violence call, for example. Or last night in the northeast part of the state, not too far north of Topeka, a very serious injury crash that another agency was responsible for working, but we provide some technical expertise in the investigation. If there's a commercial motor vehicle or a school bus involved, for example, there are inspections that troopers are qualified to provide and to assist other agencies with. So those are just a few examples.
Thank you. And are the FLIR cameras on the aircraft working great now? It sounds like they are.
They are. We have the aircraft in Hayes, the aircraft in Wichita, and a helicopter in Topeka all have FLIRs. The appropriations made by the legislature over previous years to enhance our aircraft unit will result in the delivery, I think, in less than a month of the new executive jet plus 2 tactical helicopters, one for Topeka and one for Wichita, that will both be equipped with the FLIR as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Colonel, for this update. This will be the 4th one I've had opportunity to sit on, not too many, but very comprehensive. And I'm just wondering if we can get maybe an outline, I'm sure, of the requests, the governor budget requests and the legislative asks that you mentioned here, so we can have those before us. It would be great.
Absolutely. We'll provide this to you in writing.
And then let me just mention from the top, I really appreciate the organizational chart, and it seems that you've really brought some value to the internal departments within the agency, and I think that's going to go a long ways, that recognition. I just a couple of more points. The specialty training, especially when it comes to the Capitol Police, and you know, with all the political upheavals we're seeing and the threats, I think that was really good to have that clarity and your vision to protect all 3 branches. Just pointing out a few things that I thought were really interesting. And then really like the reciprocity thought that you had there. Recruitment and retention has been something that we've heard over the years. And so great due diligence in your vision for the department. Thank you.
Senator Warren?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate the opportunity. Thank you, Colonel, for being here, and thank you for your service, and to your troopers as well. Over the summer, with other leaders from across Kansas, I had the opportunity to tour the training facility, and I think the headquarters for the training of KHP in Salina, Kansas this summer. And is that, you have a slide here about academy dates and number of class members who graduated. Does that training primarily take place at the headquarter training facility in Salina?
All of our new recruit training occurs there. We also have all of our legally mandated in-service training for veteran troopers occurs there each year. And then a variety of other in-service classes that we host for the rest of the state. For example, our breath alcohol unit teaches all DUI recognition, apprehension, all impaired driving classes for all of the officers across the state. It's our training center that provides that training, not only for us, but for the KLETC graduates as well. There are a variety of other specialty trainings. The Critical Highway Accident Reconstruction Team teaches reconstruction to other officers around the state at that facility. So there are a variety of technically driven training classes that KHP provides, not only to us, but to the rest of the state.
Thank you again for what you do to keep our highways and roadways safe. How are we doing as a state as far as when a trooper is in the middle of a traffic stop, and as far as you're pulled over to the side of the road, and generally our roadway users providing a safe clearance to keep you all safe out there as you're conducting your work, or how's that looking?
Thank you for that question. That's a very interesting and nuanced point. It really raises two issues. It raises what we call the move over law, and there is, I know, another organization, it's not the patrol, and I'm not sure who it is. It could be one of the traffic safety coalitions, or it could be one of the other law enforcement associations, but I think there is advocacy this session to expand move over, not just to recognize first responders and emergency vehicles, but any vehicle that's broken down and clearly displaying a hazard light. That's essential. We continue to experience, to respond to serious or fatality crashes because someone has failed to move over. But the other point that it brings up is not just move over, it's distracted driving. Hands-free driving, or put the cell phone down driving, or whatever you want to characterize it at. Anecdotally, I would just point to last Friday on I-70 in Hayes. After the snowstorm had subsided and after the weather had cleared, there were two troopers who were blocking I-70 and diverting traffic out near Hayes. Sunny day, clear traffic, two marked patrol cars with their lights on in the center of the roadway with extremely long visibility. A tractor-trailer driver headed to Denver, didn't see him because he was on his phone looking up an address in Denver. He was in Hayes. He hit that patrol car head-on. There's dash cam video to show it. It's horrific. Fortunately, the trooper was standing out in the shoulder trying to divert traffic when this happened, or he likely would have been killed if you've seen pictures of that car from last Friday. His dog, his canine, his KHP canine was in the kennel in the back of that car and was severely injured. That, again, is a preventable accident, and that's based on distracted driving. That was an emergency car that was parked in the roadway. Move over would apply, distracted driving would apply. I think we need to do more to address that.
Thank you for sharing your concerns here today with the committee and those following along online and in the committee meeting room. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Dietrich, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here. I appreciate the opportunity to meet you. I don't think we've ever met yet, and listen to some of the issues that you're dealing with. So I'm always interested in logistics. So I'm looking at your zone map, and I know that you're a little bit understaffed. So how do you determine in situations like that how you staff these zones? And is there one in particular that you're having difficulty with?
So there are a lot of logistical factors that go into that. One of those things is the percentage of staffing in a particular troop. So for example, the troop that I pointed out in Northwest Kansas, that is the least understaffed troop. They have the healthiest population, if you will. But that has to be balanced against our recruiting efforts as well. So I'm going to go down a rabbit trail here if you'll indulge me, but for example, that troop does a fantastic job of recruiting. And when they recruit a previously certified law enforcement officer, we're very sensitive to the fact that that could be viewed as poaching someone from another understaffed agency. So if the troop in Hayes, for example, recruits a Hayes PD officer, we think it's important to send that trooper back to the Hayes community. We have very strong partnerships with all of our city and county sheriffs throughout the state, and the last thing that we want to be viewed as is poaching. So while we may take them on as an employee, that law enforcement asset needs to stay in that community. So while they're the least understaffed, if they recruited a lateral recruit, we would want to put that person back in that community. A little bit different scenario in Southeast Kansas, for example. Southeast Kansas has, could be off by 1 or 2 here, but I think there are 16 counties in Troop H, which is Chanute. There are 14 troopers. That's 24/7 coverage. It's not enough. So we need to do a better job recruiting. Their percentage of understaffed is roughly the equivalent of the percentage that were understaffed in Troop A, which is the Kansas City Metro. But you can imagine the calls for service in the Kansas City Metro far exceed those in Southeast Kansas. So again, a long-winded answer, but there are a lot of calculations that go into that, the percentage of understaffed, also balanced with the need and the calls for service.
May I ask a follow-up question? And it doesn't have anything to do with the logistics. Do you have a legislative liaison that we can interface with if we have issues that we need some help with?
We do. Our legislative affairs team is housed in the Office of Public and Governmental Affairs. The executive commander is Major Wes Ludolph, seated right behind me. The captain is Candace Brashears, and the lieutenant is Roy Wise. So the entire legislative team is here today.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Schallenberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Colonel, for being here. And I was very impressed. I've heard these before, and you need to stay with us for a while. I'm going to give kudos to the governor for picking you. Two questions. One is your fleet. There used to be kind of a rule that you had so many miles or so many years on a car, and you swapped them out. Do you still have that? And what is that?
We do. I'm probably not the best one to speak about the details, but I can butcher it a little bit and hopefully make it intelligible. Otherwise, I might ask that if you want more, the CFO can speak to that. But essentially what that is it's a resale program. We purchase the car new, we upfit it to our patrol needs, and we drive it to what we've determined the sweet spot for resale is 49,500 miles. And then we rotate that car out of our fleet and bring it in to a new one. It sounds expensive, but the resale of that upfitted car to another agency, whether it be Kansas or whether it be anywhere else in the United States, we have a waiting list of agencies wanting to purchase those cars. And we end up being roughly net negative or a net zero, net flat on the budgetary impact. So it's a self-sustainable program.
Good. And what does I know you can't averages, but what is a trooper that's been there 10 years, working the roads, what do they make? What's their salary? Average?
Probably, if you get north of 10 years in tenure, and I'm probably going to scoot it up a little bit to 15 years because that's the point where you can vest in your retirement program. It's on the average about $40 an hour, $80,000 a year.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Reddy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your leadership in the organization. You pointed out a few asks, and I just want some clarification. For example, a request was made to see what those things were in the budget that you had actually pointed out to. But you said a comprehensive pay study. I wanted to know, when was the last time the organization had a comprehensive pay study, or if this is the first time they will be having it?
If you don't mind, I'm going to just ask for the high sign from our CFO or our CAO. Have we had one?
Mr. Chairman, I'm Sherry Mackey. I'm the Chief Administrative Officer for the Kansas Highway Patrol. Thank you for that question. It's probably been about 2 years ago that they did a market study on the pay, and the matrix was moved, and the troopers were compensated in line with that. With that said, it was a domino effect, so we went down that path to address the lack in pay, and so as soon as we increased it, you had neighboring states and other law enforcement that increased theirs too, so we're kind of back to square one again.
To update it, okay. Because oftentimes there are pay studies that are done and not always followed as they should be, so you're never really caught up because you're not done. Okay, that's great. We had one done in Riley County by McGrath, and that was similar. My next question is about the body cameras. I'm surprised that you don't have any body cameras. You said something about $2 million funding from the state with a grant of another $2 million, so that's $4 million. Does that also cover, what does it cover? Is it the basic hardware, or is it also the software and the data infrastructure to store everything?
It's all of the above, and it would also serve to integrate the technology with our existing in-car dash cameras. So we do have in-car dash cameras, we just don't have body cameras, and that ask would technologically integrate those systems together.
Excellent. And my last question, You said about legislation for excessive speed, and we don't, I'm assuming we don't have legislation addressing that. If there are other states that have that, I would certainly like to see what that looks like so we can have some kind of a template to look at and give it to legislative research to see where we are on that.
If I may just go back to your question on the pay study, I also wanted to clarify that the pay study and the matrix movements that the Chief Administrative Officer spoke about, those were in regards to our sworn personnel. And one of the things that interests me and concerns me is how that doesn't address the pay of non-sworn civilian personnel in other job series.
And do all of them have health insurance then?
Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate your responses. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Bowers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Colonel Eric, for being here. I always look forward to your updates. I have 13 counties in Northwest, North Central, Northeast, and Central Kansas, so I appreciate the fellows on the road watching out for me, and your folks in the Capitol with us, too. It's a good feeling to know you're with us by our sides. I'm very happy that you always talk about Troop V, and you said it really well, that it's really auto theft, where we business owners, and you do a very good job up in, let's see, the Zone C, where I live, about having a structured timeline for people to go visit your trooper, but to see it as auto theft rather than a permit that we need to go on and move to get our paperwork is a very good way to explain that, where people don't understand the value of that. So auto theft is a very good way to look at that, where in the car world, we just see it as another step to get a Kansas title. So that's very important. And I had no idea that your uniforms were wool. I'm itchy for you already. So hopefully you can find some durable polyester uniform stuff to crawl under cars. So thank you for telling us that. And everything you do, especially in Salina. And I have been to your facility in Salina where we could not do a WebEx or a Zoom call because the technology wasn't there. It was a very good place to meet, centralized. However, it wasn't very effective on what we were trying to do with one of our committees we were working on. So thank you very much for that, too. We all understand the value. Thank you, Colonel. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Seeing no further questions, thank you very much for your presentation today. We look forward to your responses. And if your people would like to email those to Florence, she can get them out to the entire committee.
We'll do that immediately. Thank you.
Thank you. Committee, are there any bill introductions? Are there any bill introductions from the audience? Seeing no further business before the committee, we are adjourned.